What goes on, everybody? Welcome back to the YouTube channel. And today we're going to talk about my testimony or why I am a Christian. So, this question more or less came up this previous week during the Q&A. I do Q&As, questions and answers about Christianity, politics, lifting, strawman, whatever it may be, on a weekly basis on Tuesdays on my Instagram. And yeah, the question came up on why I am a Christian or how I became a Christian. And it gave me the idea to do like just a little video about my testimony, why I'm Christian on the YouTube, in case anyone's curious. And maybe it could help somebody out or maybe lead them in the right path of them, figuring out what they want to be and hopefully lead them to Christ. So yeah, I mean, for me, my testimony isn't that crazy. That's kind of part of my testimony is because I grew up in a church where I used to hear people talk about, revival, being saved from crazy lifestyles like, alcoholism, drug use, porn addiction, affairs, crazy stuff. And, growing up in San Bernardino, you hear it quite a lot. And, growing up in the church to a degree, I maybe felt, very self-conscious of me not really going through all of that. But to actually go back a little bit, I didn't really grow up in the church like most people that I've known growing up. I did go to the church, on and off, probably starting from like second grade to around fourth, fifth, sixth grade. But we weren't really a church going family. It was more or less just going to church on Christmas and Easter. Very, very common. You hear that, people who aren't really Christian or maybe they're pseudo Catholic. And yeah, they go during the big Christian holidays. And that was me for the most part. I saw church as more or less a daycare because I would get dropped off there on Sundays, be there for a couple hours, watch some videos, play some games, and go home. So I didn't really understand what a Christian was or what God was. It just felt like another place you had to go. So I went. And it was like that for a while up until about 2011. And this is kind of like my, I guess, canon event if you're into like, Marvel or Spider-Man, that type of thing. And it was in 2011 where my uncle had passed away, and that's where I kind of felt a shift on where my family was going to go. And that's when we started going to church, the Rock Church, down here in San Bernardino, more frequently. I think, especially looking back on it, my mom, it was her brother, and I think she was in a period of just trying to seek answers. But I haven't had a really chance to really sit down and talk to her about this and get her mindset. But this is just kind of what I observed. And, it came down to her, I feel like she wanted confirmation on what happened to her brother to make sure he was okay because, to not get too much into it, it was a very, very traumatic accident that he had passed away from. So it wasn't really like, oh, he had a chance to, ask for forgiveness. So, but that led us to the Rock, and my mom, for the most part, like I said, was trying to seek answers, and we started going there very, very frequently. We went from rarely going to, every Sunday and Wednesday, and I started going with her as well. It was just me and her for a few weeks. I got to go to the youth. Again, I was probably like around 11, 12 years old, and I started, hanging out with other Christian teenagers. And, eventually, I don't know, again, to the conversation, what led to it, but my father started coming to the church as well. And, my father, very old school, Hispanic household, when my father led, the rest of the family followed. So that's what we started doing. And we started going to the Rock as a family. And I think that's really where my Christian journey truly began, because within that same month, it was around late January of 2011, where I decided to get saved and become a Christian outright. Because I kind of did it during, that weird daycare version of church that I was growing up in the children's ministry, but I didn't really understand what I was doing or what it meant. It wasn't until I became a teenager I actually started to try to understand what a Christian was, and really pour into worship, really pour into prayer, and then I felt a presence. I felt there was something out there bigger than myself that I wanted to know and understand and be a part of. And at the time, again, I wasn't fully sure what a Christian meant, but I did know there was something out there greater than myself. That's why I feel like, that upbringing didn't lead me down the whole like atheistic, agnostic route. Like I knew something was out there. I knew that there was something bigger than myself, and I wanted to know what it was. So from that point forward, from 11 up until 17, so the next 5 to 6 years, I was, going to church on a weekly basis. I was attending, going to events, making great friends, having fun as a Christian, having fun at church, which I think really molded my perspective that it doesn't have to be this doom and gloom upbringing of being told no, no, no. Like you can genuinely have fun. Like I never had a desire to go out and party, to go out and drink and go out and discover these things because I felt like church provided this fun avenue and to do it in a right way. And, to go back to the whole me not having a great testimony, that more or less was my testimony. And, it took me a few years to truly understand, appreciate that the commandments that God gives us to stay away from sinful desires, to avoid things that inevitably lead to death and hurt. That those were safeguards that protected me. That saved me from trauma that I would see and witness from other people who attended church. And that was my testimony. That was something that, with hindsight, I am grateful for because I didn't have to go through the trauma. I didn't have to go through a loss or pain or heartache like other people around me, both teenagers and adults. So that was an amazing time. But as I got older, after high school, I did go on to join the military. I signed up at age 17 through parents' permission, and that period of time, I think that is when my faith was truly tested because I more or less grew up in an environment where other people believed in God and my friends believed in God. And, high school was kind of like hit and miss. But, to be fair, I didn't really talk about God as much in high school versus, any other environment. But as an adult, going into adulthood, into the military, that is where my faith, my morals, and why I believe them were being challenged. And that I think also took part in me becoming the Christian I am today because so many Christians out there have not put their views to the test, have not been asked to explain or articulate what they believe and why they believe it. And the military gave me that test. It gave me that challenge, which again, I am grateful for because I met with so many different walks of life. And, I met guys from multiple states, from Brooklyn, from Chicago, people who were atheists, Hindu, different types of Christian sects like Catholics and Mormons, actually. And it really exposed me to different views. And, for a lot of people that I personally have met, that is where they kind of lose their faith because there's no one really in their personal lives keeping them on track. You're not being, accosted by, mentors or friends anymore. Like it's on you now. And you can either, continue with it or drop it. And I continue with it. I was, asked why I did certain things or avoided certain things. Like, yeah, I went into the military as a virgin because I was waiting for marriage. I went into the military without a sip of alcohol. I went into the military with no tattoos, things that I thought were normal, and people were trying to tell me that they weren't. So, and I had to explain to them like, well, yeah, like I do this because I am a Christian. I do this because I believe God is doing this to protect me, and that is the right way to go about things. So this whole right and wrong mentality was again reinforced, and again, it made me so much more. I think I probably say more extrovert than I already was because I actually started conversation with people because then I would put it in their shoes as well. It was like, okay, so why do you believe what you believe? Why do you have these views on God? And again, it strengthens, it in turn strengthened me to better explain and defend my faith to more or less that part of the story. And, again, it makes me the Christian I am today without that chapter in my life. And fast forward while I'm still in the military, I get back from, basic training, AIT, a couple years later, a deployment. And, this is right around COVID, which, everyone remembers. And I went through a deployment, again, in an environment where I wasn't really surrounded by other Christians as much as I would like. But again, I was kind of like that person. I was the Christian guy in my platoon, in my battalion. And, I kind of enjoyed that because I wasn't scared of it, but, people would in turn come to me for questions about why I believe. And, I hoped I planted seeds in the long run. I might go in a whole video about being a Christian in the military down the line. Let me know if that's something you guys are interested in. But to fast forward a little bit to after deployment, about a year after deployment, I actually broke off a 4-year relationship. And again, that could be a separate video, but basically I was now a Christian adult who has never dated before whatsoever as an adult. And it's a weird spot to be in. And I think that was kind of like a continuation in my growth as a Christian, because now I am dating as an adult, as a Christian, and I have to make sure my morals are held and that they are going to be used to find my future wife at this point. Because, yes, as a Christian, I was taught and raised that we date for marriage. We don't just date for the sake of it. And again, I think I was put under multiple tests because I would be suggested women in my life or through coworkers or friends of like, oh, this person's Christian. Cool. What does that mean? And that really helped me to, define what I think a Christian should be, what they should, how they present themselves, what their belief should be, and how, I shouldn't be a hypocrite in that. I should also embody those values as well. But it showed me, okay, just because someone's Christian doesn't really mean that they're Christian, or like they can say they're Christian, but mean totally different things. So that was also, I think, a very crucial point in my life as well. And of course, I'm very old school in my dating routines at the time. I've gotten to videos on this before, but again, this besides the point. It just helped me articulate, defend, have a good foundation for my faith in the dating world. And I'm grateful for that, because that's how, again, fast forward, I was able to meet my wife, who, evidently did go to our church when I was a teenager, but was never seen in a romantic light. Grateful that changed, because I had time to kind of mold and become the Christian that she fell in love with, and the Christian that she became that I fell in love with. And, it was amazing and it was awesome. Like, we checked off all the green flags, and, fast forward again, we're engaged, now we're married, and now we have a kid together. So it's crazy. But with all that being said, yes, that was my kind of testimony of how I started becoming a Christian, or why I am a Christian. But I think why I stayed a Christian is something that a lot of people need to really understand in their own personal walks, because, we have a lot of people, quote unquote Christians today, who grew up in the church and they claim Christianity, but don't really understand why. And yes, the sensation that I felt in 2011 during worship that, pushed me to commit my life to Christ. Yes, that's a very crucial part, but that alone, I don't think would have kept me on that path. I had to do research. I had to make sure that, there's actual credible evidence for this. And that's when I started pressing in, now more than ever, the reports and the data for the resurrection, the arguments for God, the credibility of the Bible. Like, these are things that every Christian needs to know and understand, and again, to be able to articulate its reliability and credibility. Because without that, the foundation that experience set, it kind of falls by the wayside, because that's what the world does. It gets you to doubt. It gets you to question God. It gets you to turn away from God and, go seek pleasure and answers from different avenues that are from this world and not from God. So I say all that just to, encourage you guys that, yes, you can have these amazing experiences from the Holy Spirit. You can have great moments in prayer and worship, but you have to make sure that you're fed, meaning time in your word, time researching the data behind Christianity, behind the church fathers, behind the scriptures, behind, the reports and the historical data behind the resurrection, the ontological and theological arguments for God, which I find fascinating and I love doing. And, it's kind of like a personal homework for me, but I think for any Christian, you should have that responsibility of, actually doing the research and actually understanding why you are a Christian. And to, of course, live it out. That's something that I preach very commonly, is that the idea of old life to new life. While there wasn't a much of an aggressive change in my personal walk, that doesn't mean that there isn't these examples from other people's walks. So, like, yes, there's traumatic changes, but we have to make sure that this new life that we are using to, glorify God, that's not resembling that old life. We can't be cursing. We can't be drinking. We can't be, well, you can drink, but don't get drunk. We can't be getting drunk and cursing and listening to worldly music and talking worldly while claiming Christ, because that's just going to be a disconnect for unbelievers, and it's going to be seen as hypocritical from Christians and non-Christians alike. So hopefully that made sense. Hopefully that helped somebody, and maybe answer some questions for you guys. Let me know if you want future videos on my time in the military. Again, my experience, specifically my experience in Christian dating. Whatever it may be. And, like, I enjoy doing this. I love talking to you guys. Please let me know your thoughts, your concerns, your questions, and hopefully I can help in some way, shape, or form. But until next time, God bless you all, and we'll talk to you soon.